Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. As we wind down the year, several large-sized question marks hang over the fate of the Indian economy. While some believe recent trends point to a sharp and smooth recovery, several data points indicate that may not be the case. The last few weeks have also been dotted by protests in huge numbers by the farm community demanding a repeal of three contentious acts around farm services and price assurance. What are the imperatives before the Finance Ministry now, and will the Farm Bill deadlock get resolved? Joining me to talk about that is Montek Singh Ahluwalia, former Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission of India. Thank you, Mr. Ahluwalia, for speaking with me. We've only just got the Q2 GDP figures, and it seems a divided house where many, including the Reserve Bank, are actually rooting for a smoother and sharper recovery, while other economists point to the fact that there's more pain and perhaps worse pain when we roll around into the next few quarters. Given what you've seen so far, what is your sense of how things are trending?
I don't have enough information on the pace of the short-term uptick. I mean, it's quite clear that this year is going to be a bad year, but it's also quite clear that the first quarter was the worst. So if you're asking me how quickly will the economy recover, there's genuine uncertainty. But, you know, most people, the slightly more optimistic ones, think that maybe we'll get a decline in GDP growth in the current year of about 8%. And a little more pessimistic guys feel that it could be as much as 10%. Now, frankly, we will know in due course, and it's a bit of a mug's game to make short-term forecasts. I think we should just assume that it'll be in that range. The important thing, and this is an important thing, is that the economy is actually recovering. So the real signal is that for 2021-22, which is the next fiscal year, we will see a continuation of this growth. But please remember that if you've declined by between 8 and 10% in the current year, and this is followed by 7.5% growth in the next year, then we'll only be getting back to where we were in 2019-20. So really the first proper post-pandemic period when you can judge the momentum of growth will be in the year 22-23. And I think the big question is, are we going to go back to what was the growth rate before the pandemic hit us? Because that was not a good growth rate. I mean, the economy was slowing down. And in the 2 or 3 years before we got hit, the average growth rate was between 4 and 5%, not the kind of 7-8% that we were getting used to.
Yeah.
So I'm quite sure that the economy is recovering from a bottom, digging itself out of the hole. It's also true that this hole is not just the fault of macro management. It's a global phenomenon. All economies are showing negative growth. I'm just concerned that we shouldn't get too excited by the fact that there's a recovery. Let me make just one point. In the first quarter of the financial year, the current financial year, there was a decline of GDP by about 24%, okay?
Yeah.
I would assume that at the end of this financial year, we will be back to a little bit of a positive growth. But you know, this means that in the first quarter of the next financial year, it will be the base level will be 24% decline from 2019-20. So you may well see a 24% rebound, but that's only going to get back to where you were in 2019-20. So don't get too excited by suddenly seeing double-digit growth in the first quarter of the next year. That will tail off in the course of the year, and the overall performance will be sort of a getting back to square one. In effect, 2 years will have been lost. And then the question is, how well will the economy do thereafter? During this period, the decline has not been uniform for all segments. This is very important. I mean, if we have a decline of 8%, let's say, which is the more optimistic forecast for the economy, it's not as if everyone's income will have gone down by 8%. I mean, some people's incomes will have collapsed. Some businesses will have collapsed. Others will have been doing quite well. So whenever you get a decline in which some people are very badly hit, you know, the social consequences of that can be quite difficult. and the government will have to handle that somehow.
That is something I want to address in a little bit, Mr. Ahluwalia. But as you pointed out, we weren't in a great place to start off with even before this pandemic hit us. I mean, it's now 12 consecutive quarters of struggling with growth. There's not enough clarity about the short term, but would you say there's clarity about the medium term? For instance, would you agree with the observations by Oxford Economics saying India has probably reset itself to a medium term growth of 4.5% to 5% and may well be one of the worst hit in terms of the COVID scars? Can you see that far out, and does it look that grim to you as well?
Well, I don't know if Oxford economics can see that far out. I think all that they're saying, what they're really saying is that, look, India was clobbered like everybody was clobbered. You can argue whether we got clobbered more than we should have, but we were clobbered, and they're also saying we're going to get back. And what they're then saying is, any reason to believe that we will do better than we were doing in the immediate pre-pandemic period, and they don't think so. Now, I think there's a reasonable position there. If we knew why the slowdown occurred in the 3 years before the pandemic, and we knew that that slowdown was a temporary phenomenon, we could say, well, no, we're going to get back to higher growth. We're in the same situation. During the first 7 years or 8 years of the UPA, you had very good growth. And then in the last 3 years of the UPA, growth slowed down. In the very last year, there was a bit of an uptick. Now, growth does go up and down. The average for the UPA was around 7.6%. When the NDA came in, I think they were quite rightly saying that, look, the economy has slowed down. We're going to do better. We're going to make it double digit, all that sort of stuff. And indeed, for the first 3 years, the growth did pick up. So for the first 3 years of the NDA government under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, there was a distinct improvement in growth. But then, after 2017, the economy did slow down. And you mentioned so many consecutive quarters and all. It was a worrying slowdown. And then you have to ask yourself why that happened. I mean, there are many different reasons, and then you need to look at whether those have been addressed. I certainly do not think we can assume that because we grew at 7.5% or so on average for a certain period, we're going to get back to that after the pandemic.
Let me flip
but
that.
Equally, I mean, it doesn't mean we're stuck. It depends on what we do. And I think what Oxford Economics is saying is that assuming that we don't address any of these problems, then we are stuck at 4.5, which is probably true.
Just to flip that argument for a second, though, Mr. Ahluwalia, there is a third school of thought that points to the fact that perhaps from this mess of 2020 will emerge a stronger ASEAN and India, purely because Asia has somehow managed to do a better job of handling COVID. We've been a bit more careful with our spending, which means that going into 2021, it gives us an upper edge over some other countries and other geographies. Could that be the case, that a rising tide across Asia lifts all, including India?
Well, I think it's certainly true that Asia, particularly East Asia, has done very well. And it's also true that this is the part of the world where optimism is actually high. I think one of the things I'm disappointed by is that we seem to have opted out of East Asia. The decision not to join the regional comprehensive regional economic partnership agreement, I think was a very disappointing step, because had we pushed ahead and joined, then I think there'd be a very good argument that India will participate in the growing prosperity of the East Asian region. I think this has been one of the weaknesses of policy, which actually got reflected in the slowdown that we observed before the pandemic. And that is that the long-standing policy of opening up the economy and sort of integrating with the rest of the economy, lowering tariff levels gradually, this was reversed. I think it was in 2018 that Finance Minister Jaitley raised the tariffs arguing that we need more protection. And then that continued. And I think in the last year or so, 2 years or 3 years, we've raised tariffs on a large number of items. That is caused a lot of concern that are we stepping back into a kind of old-fashioned protectionism, which if we are, would in my view be very disastrous. And you have to say in favor of the government that they've said repeatedly that that's not what we are planning to do. I mean, ministers have said that Atmanirbhar, which is the latest slogan, is not closing down. It's kind of strengthening India, joining global value chains, etc., looking out. If that's so, I welcome it. But I don't think the actions are consistent with that. I mean, if you want to join global value chains, you don't raise tariffs. And if you want to join global value chains, you join RCEP. You don't stay out. So I'm not sure how what we are doing is actually consistent with the stated objective. Now, frankly, we still have the option of getting in because these countries have left that option open to India. I have no idea whether the government initial decision to stay out is simply tactical. In other words, they want to negotiate a little tweak here and a tweak there and then join. But I think if we stay out, then what you say will turn out to be true, that the Asian region will do well, but I fear that we will not be able to participate fully in that. And I think also we are weakening our geopolitical position. Because these countries, they're very aware that they are dominated economically by China. I mean, they have other important economic players. They have Korea, they have Japan, they have Australia. But China is such a dominant power, economic power, that they wanted India in there. And I think we should have been in there. And had we been in there as this group evolves, we would have had a bigger role in making rules. I know there is a point of view that says that no, we should first improve our own competitiveness and then join later. But the arrangement allowed for a delayed transition. So if we had to do certain things, then I think we do have to do certain things to improve our competitiveness. That should be top priority. At 4.5%, 5%. It's really perceived as a reversal of policy. And let me say, it's a reversal of a long-standing policy. The whole policy of opening up and that opening up trade will be good for India began with the 91 reforms, which was not a Congress government. It was continued by the Vajpayee NDA government, which also said we must lower tariffs, which also opened up the economy. It was the Vajpayee government that for the first time allowed the import of consumer goods without licensing restrictions. Okay, so this had created an impression around the world that no matter what government is in power, with a Congress-led UPA, which more or less continued the same, although I think they did less in lowering tariffs than personally I would have thought we should. Now, that whole thing is being reversed. It sends the wrong signal.
I want to shift from the external to the internal for a bit because you head the economic advisory panel for Punjab. And I want to know your thoughts on the ongoing protests against the three farm acts.
Well, the panel that I headed was not supposed to make recommendations about what to do now. In fact, the terms of reference given to us were that, look, we're currently all fighting the COVID pandemic, but look ahead. After the COVID pandemic is over and the economy of Punjab has recovered, economy of India and Punjab, post-pandemic, what should be our policy? So everything we said was in a post-pandemic period, okay? And I think what you're seeing at the moment, I don't have enough knowledge of what the issues, the contentious issues are. They are discussing with the government. I hope they come to some satisfactory conclusion. But it's very clear that the narrative has got out of control. I mean, there are several issues that are being raised. One issue is simply a constitutional issue. That should the central government be making laws in areas that belong in the realm of state government policy according to the Constitution? I'm not a constitutional expert, so no doubt if this is challenged, it's the Supreme Court that will have to pronounce on this. But it was always my understanding that marketing of agricultural commodities is a state government matter. And in fact, we were in favor of modernizing agricultural markets. If you look at the 11th plan, if you look at the 12th plan, it raised the point that particularly in Punjab, you need to diversify agriculture. I mean, Punjab did a wonderful job in providing the country with food security by expanding the production of wheat and rice. You are presently in a position where, rice requires so much water, and the green revolution technology is using so much kind of chemical fertilizer that is ecologically very damaging. Now, how do you change? Our recommendation for agriculture was that you should have a clear target of diversifying. The target for diversifying would involve subsidizing farmers to shift out of rice into other crops. It would require marketing support for non-cereal crops, and non-cereal crops cannot be supported by the FCI or even by minimum support prices. It has to be supported by a healthy farming, healthy farmers markets with the private sector playing a big role, and maybe strengthen the farmers through farmer organizations and that kind of thing. So we had said that you need to do all of these things, and you need to persuade the farmers how to do it, and it has to be a staged transition. That's not what's being done. Today, for example, the perception of farmers, they may be wrong, but the perception of farmers is that the mandis are going to be got rid of, the MSP is going to disappear. I mean, this is the job of the government to reassure them that the change is not going to be such a sudden one, that there's a lot in it for them, etc., etc. I think there's also another issue in the whole thing, and that is, and it's been made by many people, that quite apart from whether the center has the legislative capacity to make laws, the way the laws were passed did not allow for adequate consideration, consultation. They weren't sent to the Standing Committee of Parliament, etc. Now, I mean, one of the things that legitimizes a democratic system is that you don't use a parliamentary majority as a brute force thing, except when it's an emergency issue. Now, this was not an emergency. And furthermore, you're making a major change in the middle of a COVID crisis. So you've got an economy that's clobbered, and you're introducing a whole lot of new changes, and you're doing that without much consultation. So not surprisingly, there's been a lot of concern. I just hope that the government is able to reassure farmers that, their concerns are not justified and come to a satisfactory conclusion.
It has been a long-standing view, though, Mr. Ahluwalia, that the MSP is perhaps not, neither the most elegant nor the most efficient way to work out proper remuneration to the farmers. What, to your mind, might have been a better way to go about this? Because that really seems to be a very strong point of contention for the farmers. The fact that there is no MSP guarantee for them once they move into, engaging with the corporates directly one-on-one.
No, I think that's a genuine issue. It's not a question of corporates versus non-corporates. Let me say that for cereal crops, it is possible to have an MSP. It is possible to have the mandis as a parallel mode of operation. And therefore, the farmer has the opportunity to operate through the mandis. But if the corporates can give him a better deal, well, let him make a choice. There is no way that diversification out of cereals into fruits and vegetables and crops like that can be accompanied by a minimum support price guaranteed by the government. That's simply not possible. And I think again, farmers have to be made to realize this. The other problem is that what is the correct minimum support price? What is happening is with the minimum support price that we've got, the production and the procurement is much above what the FCI can unload. So stocks are building up. So, if this leads to the minimum support price becoming moderated, it is in the interest of Punjab farmers to look for other ways of earning higher income. Now, that's not easy to do. That's why I don't think this should have been done in the middle of a crisis. The crisis wasn't caused by the farmers. It's something completely different. So frankly, there should have been more consultation. There should be more persuasion. There should have been more involvement. And the changes, the other question is, the changes could have been left to the state government. In the past, we always operated on the assumption that laws relating to agricultural marketing have to be passed by state governments. And centre would advise them with model acts and that kind of thing. Now, if you did that, since the government controls a large number of BJP states, including states in the grain belt, Haryana, for example, has a BJP government, what would have been wrong with sort of outlining that, look, this kind of laws we want, and we're recommending it to the state governments, and leave the state governments to make the choice, and simply ensure that Haryana and Madhya Pradesh and UP actually implement them. And if Punjab doesn't want to implement them, let them stay out. That way, you would create, through competitive example, farmers would have a sense of knowing what works and what doesn't work. It would not be seen as being thrust down their throat.
Two other things are happening though, Mr. Ahluwalia. The central government points out that several Congress-led states have already accepted the APMC norms. And, a lot of the data that's coming out is pointing only to what's happening in Punjab. For example, the fact that Punjab, each farm household in Punjab is getting a subsidy of 1.22 lakh. This, of course, includes fertilizer and other things. They also point to, as you alluded to, the fact that Punjab is not doing as much high-value crop addition as they should. Why is this narrative being built about, Punjab versus the rest of India when the Farm Act actually affects everyone? Do you think there is a huge trust breakdown here that needs to be addressed before anything else? And I mean this for both political parties against the community.
I mean, if you look at the newspapers, it's true that the agitation was led out of Punjab, but I think farmers in Haryana seem to be just as concerned. Other farmers are also concerned. So it's not exclusively a Punjab-led issue. But in the end, when something becomes politicized, it becomes very difficult to go back to basics. Rigid positions are taken, and then really the solution of that problem lies in the realm of politics. It's no longer an economic issue. And I think that's true in this particular case.
I want to switch back to the economy per se. In a recent interview, the finance minister to Bloomberg, the finance minister pointed out that fiscal measures will always fall short given the severity of the pandemic. You've been in that situation of planning for the economy and trying to build over a longer term. Do you agree with that view that there weren't enough fiscal measures to address the situation when it first struck?
Well, no, wait a minute. What you quoted the finance minister saying is that in the face of a pandemic, you cannot completely counter the effect of the pandemic through fiscal measures, and I agree with that. I mean, there would have been a negative effect. Question is, would the negative effect have been as bad as it is? And could we have reduced the negative effect if we had done more on the fiscal side? I'm inclined to think that we could have. And I think there's an important point here that, when we say the fiscal stimulus, a lot of discussion has taken place on the size of the stimulus. And in the public debate in India, this has often been described as 10% of GDP. That's not the fiscal stimulus, that's monetary plus fiscal. So actually what has happened is a very substantial expansion of monetary activity, credit, etc. I think the RBI, a good job, like other central banks, they've loosened up. I think the criticism that's being made is that the fiscal component of the stimulus was too small. And I think that's correct. The impact on poorer people, the impact on the informal sector, the impact on the more vulnerable sections was very large, and as indeed the migrant crisis showed. And there should have been a much clearer assertion much earlier that look, we're gonna put in place a safety net, not kind of we're doing something for 3 months and so on, and then expand it to another. It would have been better to say that we're going to do this for the whole year, but we may tail it off if the economy recovers faster than we expect. Something like that. So from an expectations point of view, people have a sense that they're going to get support. And I think it would have not involved a huge amount of money, maybe 1% of GDP. The deterioration in the fiscal deficit is going to be much more. And that is mainly because of loss of revenue. In the Indian context, what's going to happen, I mean, these numbers are all over the place, but we should have said very early that the 3.5% or whatever it is fiscal deficit, the budget, and a lot of people said it was underestimated anyway. You should have said, look, because of the pandemic, this is irrelevant. It is going to be much more. And we should have come upfront and said, look, this year, we cannot stop having a large fiscal deficit. But once the economy recovers, we're going to go back to the path of fiscal correction. That's the only sensible way of doing things. Now, many people would have said, oh, well, we've heard that before. That's what they said 5 years ago and the previous government said and so on. And it's true that on the fiscal side, except for the first 4 years of UPA 1, when there was a very substantial fiscal improvement, both the UPA and the NDA haven't actually been able to bring about the kind of fiscal improvements they talked about. So credibility is low. But you can't change the past. So what you do is you say, look, we're going to have a big fiscal deficit, but these are the structural changes we are putting in place now. And people have to be persuaded that you're serious about them. Now, it's always very difficult to establish confidence, but that's a challenge, and you can't get away from it.
She also pointed to the fact that she was willing to spend as needed going into the new year in order to boost the economy back, Mr. Ahluwalia. And that was the other fear, when this debate about fiscal outgo happened. And you're right, it's basically about 1.3% of GDP, I think, the real fiscal outgo. And the fear was if we didn't act then, we were doing more damage going ahead. Do you think this situation can still be resurrected if we do some kind of cost push or spend push now?
No, certainly. I mean, look, I think the economy, the COVID pandemic has done a lot of damage to the economy. In the informal sector, I mean, many businesses have just been wiped out. There are many other businesses that have been kind of kept alive by being given credit. But, if their business model is no longer viable, when the giving of credit stops, they're not going to be able to repay the credit. So quite frankly, I think we do need to do more. Let me give you a very simple thing which we could do. I think the unwillingness to recognize that the fiscal deficit is going to be much higher than was projected basically leads to the system to try to control expenditure. Okay? And the way the system, and this is true of all governments, the way the system in India controls expenditures doesn't pay its bills. And that's the easiest thing to do. I mean, contractors whose bills are there get questioned, they're not released, you raise some questions. Since our budgeting is on the basis of cash outgo, it's very easy to try to keep the fiscal deficit in a reasonable way by passing on the problem to the private sector and the contractors. That does a lot of damage to the economy. They can't pay their wages, they can't pay their suppliers. It would be much better if we had said, look, the fiscal deficit is going to be 4% higher or 5% higher because there's a collapse of revenues. Don't worry, we're going to borrow. private sector is badly hurt, we're not going to hold back bills. And I think if that were done, you would have had a much healthier private sector with money coming in, which was owed to it. As it is, what has happened is probably we raise a large number of questions about bills. And remember, once questions are raised, it's not very easy to release those bills. I mean, these poor guys are going to be spending a lot of time trying to show that those questions were not valid. So I think the damage that's being done is being underestimated. Well, we could still correct it, but it has to be corrected. It can only be corrected if there's an upfront recognition that we are not trying to achieve anything like the 3.5% fiscal deficit. I mean, look what's happening around the world. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, UK, has blown the budget. The United States has blown the budget. Their debt to GDP ratio has shot up. We are pretending that we don't have to do the same thing. And I think that's a mistake. I'm not saying, by the way, that we had fiscal space, unlike the Germans. We didn't have fiscal space. But whether you have fiscal space or you don't have fiscal space, if you get a temporary collapse of revenues, which is what's happening, you have no alternative but to say, we'll borrow, but I promise you, we'll work out the debt over the next 2 or 3 years by being fiscally more prudent, and most of all, by getting the growth going. In a way, the fiscal deficit gets hurt when you hurt growth because revenues collapse even further.
What's your own sense of what that fiscal deficit figure might look like? 8% or much higher than that?
Well, I haven't done the sums, but let me share with you if you read the financial press, this is what people are saying. First, it's not centre's fiscal deficit alone that matters. It's the centre plus the state. This was supposed to be something, I forget, 5.5 or whatever it is percent. It's probably going to be in the range of 12%, and some people say even 14%. So actually, there's going to be a slippage in the combined deficit. Now, part of this slippage is simply making transparent what was earlier hidden. I mean, for example, we have not been giving the Food Corporation of India the subsidy that it needs for the sale of wheat, which it makes for the food distribution system. We've been forcing them to borrow. Now, they're not a profit-making organization, so this is simply shifting borrowing, which should be done by the central government, to the Food Corporation of India. It should be brought back into the budget and should explicitly give the Food Corporation what is its due. Okay? In a way, this is a wonderful opportunity for the finance minister, because when she goes in to present her budget, I mean, sometime or the other, some finance minister will have to accept the fact that the Indian fiscal deficit numbers are simply not accepted by experts as being in line with global standards. So I think the best thing to do is to say, listen, this is a problem. It's not just an NDA problem. I mean, the problem was smaller in the earlier government, but this sort of thing happened even before. Just make a clean breast of it and say these practices are built up. From now on, we're really going to be good. Now, that has the advantage that if you can say that, look, the combined deficit this year, or the centre's deficit this year is this high, and I'm going to reduce it by 2 percentage points, you don't get to a ridiculously small number. If you don't do that, and you try to reduce the deficit, you get to an impossible number, which nobody will believe. I think this is a great opportunity in the budget to come clean. And my good friend Shamir Acharya has said that in an article, and I'm just saying this not to indicate that I'm not being original, although I've also said it earlier. I think he said it in the Business Standard yesterday or day before, that this is the time to come clean. People will appreciate transparency. As it is, nobody believes the fact that we've got the fiscal situation under control.
I spoke with Dr. Acharya only yesterday or day before yesterday, I think, and he made many of the points that you're making as well, Mr. Ahluwalia. But, I want to go back to an important point you raised at the start of our conversation, which is that history has shown the economic impact of a pandemic can be profound, especially for those at the bottom of the pyramid. Do you fear that might also be the outcome of this going, into the next few years, where this First of all, the gap between the very poor gets wider and wider, as also the number of people that now fall within that bottom of the pyramid gets far larger, as people have been, like you pointed out, completely wiped out, both in terms of professions, jobs, businesses.
No, that's very true. I mean, let me say there are several different factors about Africa, not all of which are Indian. One of those is that globally, the effort is being made to counter the pandemic through loose money policy. Okay, central banks all over the world say we want to keep interest rates at zero. If you keep interest rates at zero, then it becomes cheaper to borrow. Although it's not clear, they'll always remain zero. If liquidity is flooding around, it goes into the stock market and stock values shoot up. And that creates inequality because those who've been holding stocks are much better off. Those who've just been relying on income earned are not so well off. That's point number one. Point number two is that there are profound changes taking place in the global economy which relate to technology. The growth of digital technology, which is which can be said to displace labor and replace it with both technology and capital. And that actually lowers income levels of those who rely entirely on unskilled labor. That we cannot get away from that technology if we want to remain internationally competitive. But that will imply that we will not be hiring lower skilled labor. So to counter that requires a long-term strategy. First of all, educating our labor force so that it can fit into the modern economy. And secondly, expanding at a rapid rate so that we create jobs. So it becomes, the solution is not a simple one. It becomes a solution that are we planning on getting back to 7 and 8% growth? And how do we get back to 7 and 8% growth? And I think the policies, everybody will agree with the target, but the policies that will get you there is what needs to be more thoroughly debated. And there are different views on that.
My final question to you, which also a handful of economists, albeit, but some economists have pointed out, is that there is now evidence that growth depends not just on economic policy, but on trust in society. And the more you harbor divisiveness and mistrust, it causes great harm to the economic prospects of a nation as well. Do you fear that's something that India is living through?
Well, let me say that, trust and non-divisiveness are absolute values. I don't like the idea of saying we should promote trust, otherwise we won't get economic growth. I mean, I think we should promote trust because we want a more decent society. And a divisive society should be resisted. Now, if you go further and say that, could it be that if we have a polarized society, we might get more growth? I don't agree with that. If anything, it will reduce growth. The reason it will reduce growth also, and I mean, when we talk about polarized here, I'm not really talking only about polarization of communities. Polarization here will become regional, it will become related to capital versus labor. If the economy does not grow rapidly, then different parts of the country will grow more rapidly than others. The parts of the country that are nearer the coast, have better infrastructure, etc., will do well. The hinterland will not. So you'll get regional tensions building up. If you get a lot of unemployment, many state governments will get pushed into policies of imposing requirements of hiring local people.
As Haryana has.
For jobs, even in the private sector. Completely wrong thing to do. But people get driven to these things. And therefore, the slogan of one country, one market will be completely destroyed on the labor front. You cannot have one country, one market on the product front if you're not going to allow migration from one part of the country to the other part of the country because you don't give them jobs. So quite frankly, I think the inequality, slow growth combined with inequality is disastrous. And it's disastrous in many different ways, some of which we haven't even thought about.
Much to mull about. Thank you, Mr. Ahluwalia. I appreciate your time and thoughts today. Here's hoping for more cheer in the next year, but time will tell.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.